Hello, everyone. My name is Rod Pyle. I'm the editor-in-chief of Ad Astra Magazine and have been doing some of the interviews on ISDC. I want to thank you all for sticking with us for these last 3 days. It's been an awful lot of fun for us. I hope it was for you, too. If you enjoyed what you saw, I'd like to encourage you to join the National Space Society at space.nss.org. And if you're already a member, of course, as you know, you can always donate more because we like that. So we're here for our live Q&A. Instructions on how to submit your instructions are scrolling across the bottom. Your questions are scrolling across the bottom. And we rounded up some of our best speakers to hang out with you for the next hour or so. And I just can't tell you how happy I am to be here. The one person you haven't seen speak so far is in the middle. That's Aggie Kobrin. She's the director of publications of the National Space Society and my partner in crime for the magazine, part of our very, very small staff. So let's launch right into it. We've got some questions coming in, but I'd like to start before we take an outside question. I'd like to ask Scott Bolton a question, who's the PI for the Juno mission to Jupiter. Scott, you recently did a flyby of Ganymede, which was pretty darned exciting, and those first pictures are breathtaking. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and let us know when that was planned and the big structure of things.
Yeah, that was actually a great surprise for us. So last year we started looking at the possibility of an extended mission. So we were coming up, and in fact this summer and this next month, we would have nominally ended the mission and we would have, for planetary protection reasons, changed the orbit and gone into Jupiter. But everything was healthy and everything was still working, and so NASA opened up the possibility of an extended mission. We started looking at the orbits, and as our orbit gets twisted around, we were crossing the plane where the satellites orbit closer and closer to Jupiter. It used to be we would pass them pretty far out, and we found out that basically just at the very end of the prime mission and at the beginning of the extended mission, we had the potential to pass by Ganymede. And actually use it to change our orbit and steer us so that we would then pass by Europa and then Io and have multiple flybys of these things. And so we jumped at it, right? We were basically a Jupiter-centric mission. We were focused on learning about Jupiter and the origin of the solar system and what's inside Jupiter. And all of a sudden, we were able to become like a full system explorer. Go by the satellites, we go into the rings. I mean, it was really exciting to just, even though our instruments are designed to investigate Jupiter, it turns out they're actually ideal to go look at Ganymede and Europa and Io as well. And so, you saw some of the early results, and those images were spectacular. We flew by at about 1,000 kilometers above Ganymede, and then about 15 hours later, we were flying by Jupiter. And so it was a wang bang, really fast thing. But it was great. And we're sitting there digesting the data, trying to figure out, all this new ideas. We mapped the ice shell so we can see where potentially the ice is thinner or how it changes in composition with the different colors. You could see all these features on Ganymede, giant craters, and also, these linear features that are sometimes thought to be associated with tectonic faults or in the ice, And so we mapped all that. We're busy looking to see if anything's changed since Voyager Galileo days. Just a great opportunity. I'm really looking forward to all of the satellite flybys that we're going to have over the next few years.
Well, it's so exciting that you've got these kind of timestamps now, right? I mean, we haven't been to the outer solar system much, but you have some things decades apart where you can actually make comparisons now, which is pretty exciting. Henk, I've got a question for you, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dave. I got a couple of emails while the ISDC was running asking how just normal folks can sign up for the high seas simulation, which at this point is primarily lunar simulation. So could you talk about that just a bit?
Sure. The easy way is to go to International Moonbase Alliance.com, IMA, International Moonbase Alliance. Or highseas.com, HI-SEAS.com or .org, I forget. But anyone can go as long as you have something to do while you're on faux Mars or faux Moon.
Do they need to provide you with some kind of a research proposal, or are there any special qualifications?
Well, we can't just go up there and party. Our lease with with the Department of Land and Natural Resources that we actually do science up there, and so it's not an Airbnb. It's a serious science mission, and you have to have something that you want to find out. You can become part of a mission that is doing something, or you can have your own mission. And yeah, we don't like people up there who have nothing to do, but contemplate their navels. That is something we found out in the Mars missions. Is you got to keep people busy or they go crazy.
Hank, how many people are up there at a time?
Well, there's 6 people, but the way we set it up now is one of them is always us, and the reason for that is because otherwise we'd have to train them for a week before sending them up, and that is just too much work and too much time. So by having one of us on the crew, it just means that people don't wreck things or do things wrong, or when something does go wrong, they know what to do. So that takes the place of training.
So, Dave, I fibbed. I have one more question. I'm sorry. Speaking of training for harsh environments, Pascal, you have an operation in a slightly further reach up in the Arctic. What's happening with the Houghton Mars project?
Well, the Houghton Mars project is a Moon and Mars analog field research project. We're based on Devon Island in the high Arctic. Devon, most people know, is the largest uninhabited island on Earth. It's about the size of West Virginia or Croatia, in case that's a reference for any of you. Let's see. It's actually less populated than even West Virginia, if you can imagine that. It also is the largest continuous expanse of polar rocky desert. So, it's a rocky desert is a climate environment that's even harsher than tundra. Tundra is still grassy. Alaska is mostly tundra. Beyond tundra, you get to the rocky polar desert. And so that's what Devon Island is. And then it has this large meteorite impact crater, Houghton Crater. So we've been going up there every summer for the past 25 years. Can't believe it's been a quarter century. And in fact, this past year we couldn't go because of COVID. And this coming summer, it's still pretty iffy. So we'll see what happens. But we have a backup plan to go somewhere closer. We'll just keep it at that.
And could you just talk a little bit about some of the things when you're up there? You're testing a lot of technology, some of it from NASA. What are the kind of activities that you do up there in terms of hardware?
Yeah, so we've done relatively few full up simulations in the sense that we don't lock up crews and have them simulate being on the Moon or Mars, except in very specific settings. For example, we'll do a pressurized rover traverse with one of our livable Humvees. So then we have a really well constrained environment to do the simulation in. But the rest of the time, we're just going about our geological field work. And it's through the methods that we use, the practice of doing this, that we then extrapolate to lessons learned for the Moon and Mars. And I think one of the most exciting lessons so far that we sort of come up with, or solution that we've come up with for Mars exploration is how to make the spacesuit lighter, because it's really a big challenge. And I talked about this in my chat with you this morning, Rod. But the bottom line is we right now have a spacesuit that weighs about 300 pounds on Earth, and we really need to bring that mass down to about 150 on Earth, so that by the time we're on Mars, that thing would have a felt weight of only 60 pounds, which is still considerable. And so the only way to do this is to offload stuff. And we need, therefore, smaller oxygen tanks, which are heavy in your backpack. We need smaller batteries that are heavy in your backpack. We need, we need to recycle the water, or replenish the water, and carry less water in the suit. So the solution really is to not view you and wearing a spacesuit as the exploration unit, but you and your ATV, your rover, your unpressurized rover becomes your mobile backpack, and it carries the reserves. It follows you. We can do self-driving following robots easily now, and it's not one of those robots that you cannot take over and drive yourself. it's a drivable ATV. It's your main unpressurized rover. So we have this concept that turns into a concept of operation where, for Mars at least, you'll have each astronaut having their own ATV, and that ATV will essentially be a backpack that can drive itself and follow you. So you will always not be very far from extra reserves of oxygen, water, and batteries.
Well, I'm trying to find a way to offload about 40 pounds myself, so if you find any secrets, do let me know. Dave?
Well, I've always said that going to Mars is a good weight loss program.
Yeah,
but
pretty instantaneous.
Same. Dave, you want to toss out our first question?
Sure. I want to follow up on that. So, Dava Newman at MIT, former NASA administrator. So she's been working on counter pressure spacesuits that are lightweight. Is there any interaction with Dava in terms of what you're doing?
Yeah, and in fact, Dava is on the board of the SETI Institute where I work, and so we do communicate. We haven't really sat down lately and sort of compared notes on spacesuit systems. She's working, I think, in solutions that will more directly affect the part that will remain on the astronaut, the suit itself. Whereas on our end so far, we've been working on the life support system, which is what you sort of have to lug around on your back, and that is what we want to offload onto a vehicle that follows you. That's
yeah. It'd be like your puppy dog following you around, right?
Yeah, but Dava is doing really interesting work, and we're all on board that as well.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Bruce, you had a wonderful opportunity to spend some time with Steve Jurvetson, and it was really fascinating to hear your conversation with him. But I imagine there's a little sidebar chats that our audience might be intrigued to hear about. Are there insights you could share with us that you learned from Steve?
Yeah, be careful the hobbies you pick because they can have repercussions. I mean, I don't know how much you spend on that, but those pictures you saw today, that represents a lot of money. But anyway, it's good. It's good to have resources. No, it's just super cool. As a lifelong space cadet and all that. I was a kid when to date myself, John Glenn went up on my 10th birthday. So so that kind of got me started on this whole thing. So when you look at all of this history and all the people, and he was talking about some of these people, and I've actually had the opportunity over the years to meet some of these people and to see where some of this thing was, where this stuff came from and all that. And so it was just a real thrill to be just that close to so much history. It was just truly breathtaking.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, yeah, it has to be pretty inspiring to be in that environment and just soak all that up. What aspect of his little museum did you find most intriguing?
It's the little kind of sidebar stories that go along with it and everything. Like when he showed you some of the Russian stuff, and that they literally had a machine gun up there, and the Cold War really wasn't going to be so cold, maybe. So the mixture of the Soviet and the Russian and the American space programs was just interesting, and to see. In some ways, how much things have advanced, and in other ways, how things really haven't advanced that much. So it's really going to be interesting. What I'm excited is we can now look back at our half century of space exploration and all that. It's going to be really fascinating to me what's going to look like in another half century when the next generation of people are going to be sitting around and hopefully at this conference, talking about what they did. Those crazy people back in the 2020s, look at what they did.
Yeah.
I don't want to nerd out too much here, and I imagine Isaac knows about this too, but that machine gun was on one of the Salyut stations, the early Soviet stations. It was a 20 millimeter Richter anti-aircraft gun that came from the back of a Russian bomber. And they wanted to test it during that flight, but the cosmonauts kept saying, let's wait. So finally, ground control said, okay, I'll tell you what, after you guys leave the station, we'll fire the thing. So they left and they fired it remotely. And you had to aim the whole station to aim the gun. It didn't have a pivot on it because they couldn't figure out the air seals. So they shot the thing. The station nudged over by, I'm not sure how far, a number of inches anyway from the recoil. And it worked, but nobody's quite sure how long those bullets stayed in orbit. So that was kind of an interesting experiment that may come around to literally smack us in hindsight later on. I got a question here for everybody.
Hey, Rod, would you give me a minute? I just want to put a word out to our viewers. Please submit questions in the chat box, and we'll get those to our panelists. So please get those questions in, and we'll read them for you.
Okay, I've got one off of the space.com feed here.
Oh, you did? All right.
Yeah, somebody who's seen some of Scott's artistic work. So besides being a brilliant engineer, brilliant scientist, Scott Bolton is also quite the artist, working with some very big names in the music industry, among other things. Wondering, of the rest of you, I know, Pascal, you're a very dedicated painter. Anybody else involved in an artistic way with their space endeavors? A lot of face scratching going on here.
See, I get to
No,
work
but I
on
just want to
this,
say
but
that I
not
really
with
resent
myself.
people with talent, you know.
So I directed mine towards writing because I realized early on I didn't have the mind to be a scientist. After a year and a half in the UCLA astronomy department, having a severe disagreement with advanced calculus, I thought, okay, I'm going to have to become a communicator. So I was an early but less talented version of Isaac Arthur, I guess, and aimed it towards doing books, which have been fun. But one thing that always eluded me was visual art. And as I think you alluded to, Bruce, I kind of have a dirty little secret envy for Pascal and his ability to paint, and Scott for his ability to put together these incredible projects that he does. Scott, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm working on a number of things, but most of them are video-oriented stuff, space videos that I'm putting together for different musicians, and they might use them in concerts and things like that. But also I'm putting together an animation of what it's like to be on board Juno. If you had a seat on the spacecraft, what would you see if you were flying by Ganymede and Jupiter? So that's the project I'm right at the edge of right now. Hoping to finish that soon. And then I do a little bit of painting and things like that as well. And I've gotten connected in with people that even take the amazing space photos and they make quilts or out of them. It's just incredible. I mean, there's a lady out there that uses not only Juno images but images of Mars, Hubble telescope. She's just inspired by it, and some of her quilts and things are just incredible. So I mean, I think art takes all kinds of modes and inspires you. I believe strongly in combining these things together, to the creative and the analytical. So, and I did start off as an engineer, so you weren't totally wrong.
Good.
I started off as an aerospace engineer.
Okay. Pascal, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe you were inspired early on by the work of Chesley Bonestell, one of the premier space artists of the 20th century.
Well, I'm not worthy, but yeah, I was inspired by Chesley.
Well,
and even before him, because I grew up in France, I was inspired also by Lucien Rideau, who was an astronomer and who actually did the first, really realistic paintings of the surfaces of the planets and their moons. And he was, in some sense, an inspiration to Chesley Bonestell as well. He was a generation earlier. Lucien Rideau.
Well, the reason I mentioned Bonestell was because I've seen a painting or two that you've done kind of updating the Von Braun mission, where we were going to hurl huge gliders into the Martian atmosphere, which ain't much of an atmosphere, and they probably wouldn't have had a very good day had they done that. How did you update those to reflect what you knew?
Well, Chesley Bonestell has this famous painting that's at the Air and Space Museum, actually. It's in their permanent collection, called Exploring Mars. And it's a scene where you see a pressurized rover, the way it was conceived in the 50s. It looked like a post-war tank, actually, on tracks. It had some astronauts that were in spacesuits, but they looked like high-altitude flight suits, like the spacesuits of the 50s. And then you had this big shiny rocket that ironically does look like a starship now, but wasn't quite a starship because it had to get to Mars and onto Mars by coming in as part of the fuselage of a large aircraft. And then the whole fuselage section was then erected to become the ascent stage. Then, of course, there were other things that were, in Chesley's painting that would not fly, so to speak now. Like he had his base sitting right at the base of the rocket, so we now know that with the exhaust plume that would essentially blow off the whole the whole settlement that was established upon departure. So anyway, I had some fun updating some of these features and hardware elements, and then of course the landscape also got the benefit of some actual data from Mars about the color of the sky and the geology of the rocks. So I did an update of Exploring Mars, which you can check out on my website, I guess, pascallee.net. If you have nothing better to do, that is.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned the updating of the rocks, because I remember Bonistel was a little irked when Apollo 11, when the Apollos started orbiting the moon, and we started getting really good, clear photographs. And he said, "Hey, that's not how it's supposed to look." Isaac, I just got a question asking, and I'll paraphrase it a bit. I've watched your channel. I can't, because I know how hard it is to do that kind of production, especially when you're kind of single manning. I don't know how you find time to do anything else, but what other space-oriented activities are you involved in when you're not doing your videos? Is it just strictly research and interviews?
Well, we do have time for, my wife finds time for me to do all sorts of other things, I should point out. But I would say organization-wise, if it's an interesting project, we try to get involved with it, even if it's just a little bit. You never get to dig into somebody else's projects as much as you'd like to. It's the funny thing when you're younger and you're new to it, you're looking to get involved in a project and you have all the time in the world. When you're older and you know everybody, you know all the stuff you can get involved in, but you have time to do any of the fun actual jobs. So we get involved with a lot of game development, a lot of space art, a lot of early development projects, looking at things like how we do construction robots in space was one I got an email about today. And the answer is I never have enough time to do even the episodes, let alone help on all the projects I'd like to. I think that's probably something everybody here is familiar with.
Yeah, probably.
Well, questions are starting to roll in, and Isaac, I'm betting you have an answer for this one. So I'm going to show the question from Rondra.
How did this is for the
How did the gunfire? Yeah.
It was physically mounted on it, couldn't turn. They probably just flushed some oxygen in the barrel when they shot. It's very quick.
They'd have to have an oxidizer inside the chamber or something like that, right?
I think people miss in sci-fi is when you stick your finger over the hole to prevent the air coming out thing, people see a hole in the side of a space station and get sucked out the thing. It's a pretty slow process, and the air comes out at about Mach speed, whereas the bullets coming out at about that too. So I don't know how they did on that one, but it wouldn't be that tricky to put in like a solid oxygen cable, just flush some oxygen in, I should think. But
and just so it's said, when you think of a bullet, there's no oxygen access into bullet casing. It's enclosed when it fires, so I think it's self-oxidizing. And God knows the Soviets had a lot of bullets, so I think they were well set for their experiment. Dave, you got another one, or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've got a stack growing here. So this is from National Space Society's Seth Potter. I'm going to bring it up. Do the panelists have any thoughts about how settling the moon, settling Mars, and settling O'Neill-type habitats at L5 or elsewhere can enable each other, thereby bootstrapping space settlement? So who wants to take a shot at that one?
We just had an article in Ad Astra about that. I'm trying to remember who wrote it.
I think the key thing there is there's a lot of commonality. I mean, in all those places, there's a lot of common stuff that you got to be able to do. And, there's some differences, what works on the moon or Mars, may not work in an O'Neill colony and vice versa. But I think that, with the food, the water, the air, radiation, there's all kinds of common problems that you've got to solve. And, the solutions may not be identical, but hopefully they will be at least synergistic.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole idea of going to the moon first, is that we'll learn so much that'll translate into going to the Mars eventually. So regolith is very similar and how abrasive it is and things of that nature. So, yeah, good question, Seth.
Well, Hank knows something about habitat emergencies, don't you, Hank?
I know something.
You're a little closer to home, but
yeah, everything that I think everything we learn about building a habitat on the moon will work on Mars. And we are looking into centering in situ resource utilization stuff by grinding up the Hawaiian lava rock, which is 96% the same as the regular water, and then centering it into stuff. We started by trying to do landing pads with pavers, and it's all interesting stuff. And eventually, it's all going to be useful on the moon and Mars. But you were asking me about emergency stuff.
Yeah, did you have you had a couple of slightly urgent situations at your habitat at one point I read about. I think there was a generator failure, something else. I mean, not serious on Earth, but
no, I know. But the one mechanical failure that we had wasn't actually a mechanical failure. It was just somebody woke up early and saw that the lights were out, which means the batteries had drained for some reason. And in the dark, they went in to try to fix it. And they managed to open up the inverter and find out that there was still quite a bit of a charge on the batteries.
Oh boy!
Wait, I mean, this is like if you went into someone's house who had an electrical panel and you unscrewed the electrical panel and you stuck a screwdriver in there. It's on that level. So so that kind of, he got a shock and he went into shock and there was a whole nonsense around that. If he just waited a half hour, the whole system would have like booted when the sun rose, because we're 100% solar at high seas, a backup of hydrogen. So we have fuel cells that charge up the battery in case there's not enough electricity for some reason. I don't know what the reason was that the lights out, but every once in a while it'll happen. Somebody maybe turns on a space heater or who knows, and leaves it on.
The shocking experience, no doubt.
Shocking experience, yeah. So it's the reason we keep somebody on, in whatever crews we have now, we always have somebody from our team that knows what they're doing, so that people don't do dumb things.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy to judge people that touch live electrical things, but knowing that I'm in a room full of very curious people, I bet I'm not the only one that notices a kid that a screwdriver blade was almost the exact right size to fit into a wall socket. It's a bit of a surprise the first time you do it. If you do it the second time, then you're dumb. Dave?
Yeah. Speaking of shocking experiences, we have some questions about ISDC. So, Aggie, can you help us with this one? What should press release titles be from this ISDC? Is anyone writing this? Would it include something on space solar power? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. We have a lot of press releases that came out prior to this ISDC. There will be others that will come out post ISDC. So we're pretty good about putting press releases out there. We announced a number of the key speakers that were part of this, and this is going to be repeated in 2 weeks for other time zones. Just so everybody knows, we have a big contingency in India that wants to see this in Eastern Europe. So in about 2 weeks, we're going to repeat it overseas very early in the morning. So it's their afternoon and evening, and we'll have a whole other series of press releases. So we're pretty good about putting that stuff out. I don't know if it included space solar power. Do you remember that, Rod? Whether any
not specifically, it was mentioned in general terms, but it's probably a good idea to put one out because that was a big part of this. And I thought, having seen it a couple dozen times because I was editing the streams, a couple of student presentations were really outstanding, and it was amazing to me. I mean, I'm in my 60s. I'm still trying to understand half the stuff, and I see these high school kids that are jamming through these difficult engineering projects, and one team drew a patent out of what they were doing already. And I thought, okay, that's humbling. So Yeah, we'll put something out for them. That's a good idea.
Yeah, we've had a number of students who are part of a space solar power competition that's got some pretty interesting prizes and trips to Dubai and things like that. So that was through Space Canada. So there were a number of interesting things that came out of the space solar power part of it. But we are really good at putting out press releases, thanks to Rod. More than I've ever put out on anything else. It's quite amazing how many we put out there.
Yeah, and I think, Isaac, didn't you do one long segment on space solar power in your series?
Yeah, power satellites. I did that one with Chris Holland, actually, on the designs for that. Using the old Skylon stuff. It was probably one of our most referenced episodes because it kind of changed me getting the research on that one from thinking that power beaming was a bad idea to a good idea. So,
well, if
very
there's
close
anybody
to
here
it.
that can tell us how hard it is to power things with solar panels, I guess that would be Scott Bolton, especially out by Jupiter, right?
That was a challenge. And there were many that thought we were crazy when we first thought about that and said, okay, we weren't, of course, originally we were thinking we'd go with a nuclear power, but we were worried that it wouldn't be available. And so we started looking at solar, and of course we had to test and validate the cells that could work at low light and low temperatures. But there were a lot of people that thought we were nuts, but we put that in. And then, of course, once we were selected and we flew it, now you see Europa Clipper and ESA's JUICE mission, both being solar powered, going to the Jupiter system. So we kind of paved the way. So I'm a big believer in solar power. I like to say sometimes that we were green before it was in to be green.
I'm sure you all saw the pieces that Rod did, the solar power videos. We've got a few different versions of them that we're putting out everywhere, and they're just incredible. They're beautiful pieces on space solar power. So if you haven't seen them, you have to, and we've got them going every place. So that's another thing that we're doing in addition to press releases out there. Oops, sorry about that. It's doing things like that, so the world knows about it.
Yeah, it's called Dear Earth. If you have a chance, it's worth watching. Dave, what's next?
Well, we have a question from Aleph, who is our social media expert at National Space Society. And she says, what is the soonest do you reasonably see passenger vehicles making the Mars transit? And, based on space Starship developments, I think we got to see a cargo mission first, and it'll follow shortly, right?
I see Pascal grinning. Go ahead.
2032.
2032.
Put down an act. Okay, we're taking
All
back.
right. And you heard it straight from the expert. So
what about the moon?
Put that on a calendar.
Oh, wait. We're already going to the moon. Isaac, what's your shot?
What are we defining passenger as for 2032?
Humans.
A crew mission the
cyborgs.
most. I'll go with Pascal on that. Might be a bit optimistic, but 2022, yeah.
Hey, Bruce, you've been watching
the
this
2020s. It's too
rest of it?
soon, and 2032 sounds plausible.
I think everybody is underestimating Elon and his tenacity. There's what's called Elon time, but he's getting better. So I'm thinking, 2026, 2028. I think he has a real possibility of putting people on Mars.
I like that answer. By the way, just in case anyone is wondering, that's not a picture of Aleph down there. That I believe that's a picture of her father in a naval uniform. So Aleph is substantially more attractive in many ways. What's next, Dave?
All right. Let's see. We're going to go to Robert Allen. Hi, Isaac. Hi, Isaac. We want to encourage you to do a video about the future of spaceports on Earth. So do you have that in the queue yet?
Well, we did do a spaceports in space one time back. We haven't actually done one on Earth. And that does sound like a fun topic, but it's going to be so dependent on, like if you're doing a mass driver, Ecuador looks really nice. If you're doing a space elevator, the equator looks nice. Other places, it just depends on what your technology is for getting into space. And I don't know what the spaceports of the future are going to look like, though, yet. There might be a fun episode to explore.
Yeah, that will be a little creativity involved there. let's see, moving down here. Well, Alep's got another one, but I'm going to take Bruce McKenzie. The exhaust plume. Oh, we did talk about this exhaust plume aspect.
It's before we came on, yeah.
Yeah. And during lunar landing, could put gravel into lunar orbit, which might hit you in the back of the helmet after one or more orbits. Let's see I'm reminded that Sean Mahoney from Maston Space Systems talked about a mission coming up in 2022 that's supposed to fly with the first Artemis test mission, where they're planning to spray a mat on the regolith before the plume actually hits the surface. It's a way to impinge the debris from blowing all over the place. But who wants to take a crack at this question here? How do you prevent?
We're missing the main expert that I know about this topic, who's Phil Metzger.
Right.
But these are taken into account. In fact, in discussions right now about the Artemis Base Camp, for example, there are discussions about not only having Starship launch pad and landing site on the moon be some distance away from where you would have your habitat structures, but it would be behind an obstacle and possibly at a slightly different elevation to precisely get sort of circumvent this issue of having a large amount of your dust crash back onto you after a few orbits around the moon. So it is an issue.
So Phil also wrote a recent paper. I just read a little bit of it about the amount of thrust needed to land a large Mars lander that included people, presumably, would probably be sufficient if you pick the wrong spot to land to gouge out enough regolith below you that the rocket would fall into its own crater, which would really be a really bad way to land. And I guess especially if you've got something like Starship. Bruce, how do you think do you have to just send robots to build a landing pad first, or what do you do to abate that?
Well, if you notice the design that Elon and SpaceX is using for the human landing system, the landing thrusters are not at the bottom; they're up higher and they're angled so that you kind of get away from that problem. I mean, back to Bruce's question there. The issue here isn't like you're gonna do this and it's going to come back and hit you. I think the whole issue here is, are you just going to ruin or make untenable the whole lunar atmosphere for whatever it is you want to do? And so I think this is where we need to be more thoughtful. I have the same problem with asteroid mining and things like that. How are you going to do this in such a way that you're not just creating massive amounts of zero gravity junk piles, and stuff like that. So there's just some thought that needs to go into this. I mean, it's a doable problem. You just need to do some good system engineering.
And I don't know if it was thought about before this or not formally, but I do remember the 1950s when the U.S. Army was working with von Braun to Isaac's going to chuckle when I say this, on Project Horizon, the 20-man army base on the moon, where we were going to stand off from the communists with nuclear bazookas and so forth. One of the things they're trying to figure out was how to utilize small arms on the moon. And there was a lot of discussion about, gee, if we fire a bullet square out in front of us at some soldier and miss, is it going to come around and hit us in the back? And I think the odds are probably pretty small, but I guess they could go into orbit if they're at the right velocity.
I think the muzzle velocity of most rifles, though, is just Mach 1 or 2 Earth speed. I don't think that's anywhere near enough for the moon orbit. Is it like 2 kilometers per second? Or can anyone remember what it is off the top of their head? The order velocity of the moon?
Let me think. No. I don't know.
I think it's at least twice the typical rifle speed, though. So
well, and the result of that was they decided to do air guns instead, because they figured, I don't have to kill anybody, I just have to puncture their spacesuit.
Yeah.
That was
what I meant to say is, if you take a look at the Chinese lander on Mars that brought the Zhurong rover onto the surface, if you look beneath the lander in pictures that show the ground right underneath the lander, you will see a pit that's several tens of centimeters in depth and in width that was essentially excavated by the lander thrust exhaust plume, basically. And that was a small thing. That was just, I think, 7,500 newtons.
So we'll go back to Dave for the next question, but just for a quick moment here, because we're just a little past the halfway point, I want to give Aggie a chance to talk about our Society's magazine, Ad Astra, now in a bookstore near you.
Yes. Ad Astra is in many, many bookstores, about 800 bookstores across the country now. And next issue will be out fairly soon, and we're going to be in the bookstores for the next year or so, and hopefully well beyond that. And just about every major city and lots of minor cities. And many of you have written articles for Ad Astra, so I thank you for that. And we are going out in a big way. So that's something new for the National Space Society and Ad Astra magazine.
And it's the best deal out there because it's not full of ads. There you go. Look at that.
There you go. I was going to look for one right here. I'm glad you had
The
one.
other space magazines are 40 pages and 15 of them are ads. Scott Bolton has to leave us soon. He has another commitment. Thank you, Pascal. You're a pal. Scott, did you want to say anything to wrap up?
No, it's been great to share this with all of you. I'm fans of all of you here. And
The other way around, but okay.
Yeah, right.
well,
Who's
also,
the famous guy here?
I thought about the debris issue, that's brought up. It's something we have to certainly worry about at the Earth, right? We learned our lesson early on, putting out a lot of debris into Earth orbit and realizing that there's no way to remove it. So I think it's really important to think ahead as we start to think about the moon, Mars, and other places, that we do things wisely. And that it doesn't just take thinking through it, but it means that we have to have some sort of cooperation and organization between the various entities that are going to go off and do things, because it only takes one party to make a serious mistake that we all end up screwing things up and suffering. So it's institutes and societies such as this that help to make sure that kind of coordination can happen. And so I appreciate the question that came in about that.
Just could you give us a quick preview of what we should expect next from Juno?
So, so I think toward the end of July, we fly, we're in about a 45-day, 48-day orbit right now. We're at 53. And so we'll fly by a little bit more distant to Ganymede again. This time we'll get better shots of the poles and from far away, and then go over the pole of Jupiter again. And we're getting closer and closer to the poles. And so one of the exciting things is eventually we're going to be able to map out those polar cyclones with our microwave instrument, which we'll see underneath to see how those routes are. And I'll give you one hint of something that is fresh science that we just got, which is the last time we went over Jupiter, we took images of that North Pole, and it looked like the cyclone, which 8 cyclones were in an octagon shape. It looks like that's breaking up. We thought we saw that happening once before, and then the next time we came around, they were back together. But it looks like this time maybe we're watching a change. So the next orbit is what's going to tell us if that's really true or not. And of course, that feeds into the science. We don't really understand how those cyclones get made, how they're maintained, what's really driving them. And Jupiter is the only, we haven't seen that many giant planets, but Saturn doesn't look anything like this, right? So it's a great, I like to think that we're going to start doing a monthly weather report on Jupiter.
Are there limitations to Juno besides financial? I mean, you have solar power to keep the buses going, but what about fuel for navigation and things? What is the upper limit on that?
So all of those, there's a number of resources that any one of them could be the limit. One, setting aside finances, because NASA's probably not going to be the one that's the limit to us if everything's working. So you have fuel, right? Because we have to use the fuel in order to point the antenna to the ground. Even if you're flying around okay, and you're able to take data, if you can't downlink it and point the antenna at the Earth, which takes some propellant, then that sort of defines the end of your mission. You could have solar cell or battery degradation, although we're tracking that. And then also the fuel. Right now, our estimate of the fuel is so that we would last another 40 orbits or more. All the way through the extended mission, we added something like 42 orbits, and we calculated that. Of course, you never know exactly how much fuel you're using. There's a little bit unknown, and you're aiming at the 90%, and you hope that you're more efficient. So far, we've been doing really well. The thing that we've most feared and has generally thought to be the thing that will really limit Juno is the radiation. The radiation at Jupiter. And as our orbit goes through there, we're going into harsher and harsher radiation regions. We can't stop that. There isn't enough propellant or rocket power to actually undo what Jupiter's gravity field can do. We're just mere mortals. Jupiter is a giant, right? So the radiation will probably get us at some point, but that may be a graceful degradation. That's what I'm hoping. Certain things will start to have problems, but we'll still get to be able to work others.
Yeah.
We'll just have to keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah. And Scott's time is up. So thanks for joining us. And
thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you.
See you, Scott.
Bye-bye.
Dave, I have another question from space.com from
All right.
Daniel Yont. Whether orbital moon or Mars should we use inflatable or hard shell habitats, I think he's saying, and a mix of module types. Also, what data has been gained from the ISS inflatable Bigelow module?
Well, let's see, Pascal. This sounds like your turf, right?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in inflatables. They work well on station. It's too bad that Bigelow Aerospace folded, but I think there are follow-up activities that are involving inflatables, at least conceptually. The trick, of course, is that inflatables in contact. This is generally true with any piece of space hardware. As soon as you get in contact with surface materials and surface operations, you're dealing with a much more abrasive and unpredictable environment. Having just inflatable structures on Mars earlier on, I think, would be a bit of a mistake. I think we should sort of have the same approach where we would start with a few modules that are really rigid and robust, buriable bags for radiation shielding, which is really the most effective way of getting radiation shielding at the surface of both the Moon and Mars. But then over time, really understand you need more volume, and one very efficient way of expanding your living space is to use inflatables. But do that incrementally, not go inflatables up front before you really have a thorough first-hand understanding of what the surface environment is like and living and working there.
Well, I guess I would extend that question, and maybe Isaac or Bruce, you know more about this, I imagine, but my understanding is that actually hard shell metal habitats can actually make radiation problems worse because high energy particles hit that, and then they fall into more smaller particles and actually become a larger risk. So if inflatable, or as Bigelow preferred to call it, expandable, perhaps a better way to go in the long run.
Well, as Pascal was saying, nothing's ever going to beat just dumping regolith on top of your habitat as cheap radiation filler. That is one thing I like inflatables for, is you pop the thing open, you get in place, and you can probably get away with burying anything, especially on the Moon, and just sealing up as you go, kind of not long-term being kept up by the inflation. It's just that's what's there to hold the structure up while you back over by the wall with the shell on top of it. But yeah, some types of radiation shielding can actually make other types of radiation worse.
Yeah. And in pop-up inflatables are actually a really interesting concept, because we were thinking of using them. In our ConOps on Devon Island, for example, we have these temporary structures that we erect, some of which we would like to see implemented in the form of inflatables, because they would come in really handy. So these would be temporary emergency shelters that would be pop-up things that you would not spend a lot of time in. They don't have to have a very long lifetime, but they would really provide shelter in a contingency. The other thing is, as far as the transfer to Mars and back is concerned, inflatables, if the station experience is sort of confirmed and transferred, I can easily see a crew having the benefit of an inflatable or an expandable, like they call it, an expandable habitat for the journey to Mars and back. And that would actually buy you a lot of volume in space.
I have a quick question for Henk. We were talking about spaceports earlier, and I've heard bits and pieces about something potentially being sited in Hawaii eventually. Do you know anything more about progress along those lines?
Spaceports?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were trying to get Kona to be a spaceport, and there's all kinds of how can I say, headaches involved there because you're competing with commercial flights. And if you build a spaceport, there's going to be times when you can't fly commercial because we need that window while something is taking off, and even like horizontal takeoff and landing. In general. So, for example, Virgin Galactic comes in glide, and it only has one shot at it, so you can't have another plane on the runway during a flight in case that something goes wrong with the plane and you can't move. Then you won't be able to land, a horizontal. So we haven't really had a lot of good progress there in terms of the spaceport in Hawaii. But don't count us out. We're working on this.
Well, I don't know if access is a problem, but I once stopped at an absolutely horrible place called Johnston Atoll on my way to the Central Pacific, which is down just off the equator.
Wow.
It looks like a dining room table in the middle of the water, and it's just big enough for a runway. And so our plane landed there, and we got out, and there's a little tin shed over in the corner, and that's about all there was. And I said, "What do they do over there?" And he said, "That's where the Army burns their chemical and biological weapons." I said, "Gee, are they doing that today?" And he said, "I don't know. I don't see any smoke." But I guess it might be a consideration if transport wasn't a problem. Dave, what's next?
So this has to do with radiation in transit. This is from Cornelius Dutcher. What breakthroughs are still necessary in radiation shielding before we have lots of people going beyond Earth orbit? Isaac, you want to take this one?
Cheaper rocket fuel. Where space radiation shielding is concerned, there's a lot you can do with magnets. There's a lot you can do with special materials. At the end of the day, the thing that helps the most is just raw mass. So anything that lets you handle certain materials like hydrogen better to actually not let them escape, which might go with graphene, would improve that. Anything that lets us just pack more mass in and move it economically would help with that. There's a lot of individual things you do with magnets, electromagnetics or permanent ones, but at the end of the day, cheap rocket fuel is the one that really solves that because it lets you get thick armor.
Yeah. And then water's rocket fuel as well. So if you jacket the spaceship in water or ice,
Mm-hmm.
Pascal, you want to take a shot at making an ice ship?
No, I mean, I agree with that. And in fact, water both contain hydrogen, and hydrogen is a good absorber of most of the high energy radiation that we're worried about. Of course, you need 2-3 meters of it, but you can imagine a transfer vehicle to Mars with its walls serving as the food and water. And I often explain in talks that if you follow what happens to the water, it turns into urine or sweat, and then you recycle it. We do that on station already, so you can maintain that shield of water. As far as food is concerned, you consume the food, and it turns into, I guess, poop for lack of a better word, and that is still a resource in deep space because it is replete with hydrogen. So you want to essentially carefully collect your poop in Ziploc bags, emphasis on lock, and that goes back on the wall. That goes back on the wall, really, where you took the food in the first place. So I do envision this exercise that people on station don't have to do because, of course, on station you're still inside the Earth's magnetic field, so your radiation environment is very benign. But if you're in deep interplanetary space, you're going to want to manage your radiation shielding. If it comprises food and water, you want to manage that. And by the time you come back from Mars, you're going to be surrounded by essentially a year's worth of yours and everybody else's, crap.
I can envision a whole series of new cliches being generated by
Well,
this
I
activity.
want to do the post-flight interview with the first crew member that got assigned something worse than KP duty for a year and a half up to Mars. Like, all right, you've got.
But one of the things is the guys at NASA Ames are actually came up with a concept called the wet wall, and they actually built the life the regeneration system, the ECLIS system, into the walls of the spacecraft, and you actually do use that as storage and processing, and then all of that, plastic that's in there, and the processing equipment, and the actual mass of the wet material, the water there, as was mentioned. So, and again, if you think of like the expandable habitats, which have a thickness to them, then this starts kind of looking interesting. So there are some synergies here if we get a little creative in our thought processes that really could be attractive.
I have a little high sea story. In the very first mission, we had flushing toilets, which were not very realistic because we ended up having to send truck up there twice a week to collect the black water. So we switched to a toilet that has sort of like
an incinerator.
No, anyway, it's a toilet that has wood shavings and bacteria.
It's a biodigester, yeah.
Biodigester, and then they'd have to turn it over after doing number one, make sure that, and then pour some more powder in on a regular basis. Well, there was a crew who actually didn't follow the instructions, and this biodigester turned into a cesspool. And so they contacted us and said, "What can we do?" And I said, "Well, you guys are on Mars, so
figure it out.
really nothing we can do to help you guys. So you're going to have to figure it out." And they end up.
What would Mark Watney do? Yeah,
they're going to have to. So
I'd be really curious how long it would take someone to come up with a way of making beer out of that or something like that.
Deal with it. They have to do it the hard way.
You're the taste tester, Isaac. Okay. So Dave, got anything to make its own new trajectory here?
I gotta say, they dealt with it, and future crews heard that story, and they were very careful after that.
Here's your beer. Have a good time, newbie.
Hey, our old Fred, who's been working so vigilantly in the background, vigilantly, is our Fred Becker. Fred wants to know, and this is kind of related, is there a way to chemically or otherwise treat Martian soil to make it safe for people?
Yeah, so the main issue with the Martian soil, right? I mean, it's sort of three factors. One is abrasiveness, which is believed to be less than the lunar regolith because there is some weathering on Mars, but it's still going to be very abrasive. So if ingested, it will tear up the tissues of your lungs. The second issue with the Martian dust is that it might be extremely fine grain, or at least have a component that's very, very fine grain, in which case it will clog the pores of your lungs. That's essentially Miner's disease with coal. It's called silicosis. So that is a problem that's very hard to deal with, the very finest particle size fraction of the Martian dust. So that is not toxicity. That's just mechanical issues with the dust. And then you have the chemical toxicity, which is the peroxides and the perchlorates. The perchlorates in particular will attack your thyroid. The peroxides will just be an irritant to your skin, to flesh, to tissue. It's just, just think of hydrogen peroxide in solid state. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with here. But the good news is that both the peroxides and certainly the perchlorates are washable out of the soil. So if Mark Watney had done that, he would have been growing potatoes on Mars. It would not have been poisoned by perchlorates, and the story might have been, might have worked better. But in any case, it's a process. I mean, imagine having to wash, tons and tons of water. If you come, sorry, not tons of water, tons of soil to clean it, and in order to make it non-poisonous for you to grow food. So not immediately, I would say.
Yeah.
So
the perchlorates are also a valuable resource too if you extract them and put it in a form of like rocket fuel or things of that nature.
Exactly. Perchlorates can be used as rocket fuel. That's a good point. So you could recover that. Again, it's a whole process that would have to be set in place for you to do that. Yeah.
So I've often thought we could make a wonderful sequel to The Martian where Watney wakes up one morning realizing, oh, his whole escape was just a dream. And he's actually stuck on Mars, and not only is he being poisoned by his quarter acre of Martian potatoes, but he also suddenly realizes that taping a big piece of plastic sheet over a hole in the side of your habitat. It doesn't do much when you're in a near vacuum and you can't breathe anymore. It'll be a very short sequel, about 4 minutes. Look kind of like that scene out of.
To be fair to Andy Weir, whom I happen to know and lives in the Bay Area, he actually was aware of several of the shortcomings in his story, because he obviously is really technically savvy and understood that there were some issues, but his publisher did not want him to fix those problems, and so there you go.
In the grand scheme of sci-fi hardness, I put at least a 9 out of 10. So very solid.
Andy Weir story. So after our longest mission, which was 12 months, 6 people staying in our habitat for 12 months, we invited Andy Weir to come to Hawaii for the when the crew coming back to Earth. Unfortunately, Andy Weir doesn't fly on planes, so that never happened.
Yeah, right.
We found out when we invited him to ISDC that he doesn't particularly like flying on planes.
No,
but he's a great interview on Zoom.
Yes, as long as he doesn't have to get on a plane anywhere. I wanted to thank everybody that was a part of ISDC, because we had over 60 segments as part of ISDC, which was really quite remarkable. And it was a lot to put together. It was a lot of time spent doing the interviews. We can see how interesting it is doing something live. So we decided for a 3-day event, we were going to pre-record most everything and organize it and put it all together. So there was a lot of work that went involved in not just the interviewing, but the putting it all together, the speaking to everybody, the editing of it, the organizing of it. And you're seeing a few of the people here that were involved in that team, but there were a number of others as well. And I want to thank everybody that was involved in that for all the hard work. Yeah, it was a lot of work, a lot of fun. And, when you hear numbers like 50,000 people saw some part of it, it's exciting, and it's really something that needs to be congratulated. But yeah, I think we'll stay away from doing 3-day virtual events for a while.
Yeah, it's funny when we do this in person that the 4 days seem to breeze through because you're meeting new people, but doing it all in a virtual environment, it's a bit of a grind. And Rod, I don't know if you want to say the marathon hours you racked up doing this.
No, it's about 300, but I will say, the beauty of something live is you get to talk about poop in space. If you have Pascal on your call.
That's true.
Program that, so that brings a whole new angle to long duration space flight for me.
We don't even have an astronaut on this panel. We went
there. There are kids watching. Don't try this at home.
So we're really counting on next year being in Arlington, Virginia, and everybody being together. And hopefully all of you will be able to join us there and doing a 4-day full-scale ISDC with everything that involves, and having lunches and dinners together and enjoying lots of activities. And, really getting to know each other, which is what you can do at a live event that you don't get to do the same way at a virtual event. So I think it turned out really well. I think it was a lot of hard work and a lot of time, more than we ever imagined. But, well worth it. And the other really nice part of this is it goes on. It lives forever. We'll do it in a couple of weeks for another marketplace entirely. But the content of it is not going to go away. People can see it endlessly. We'll have hundreds of thousands of people seeing parts of the 3-day ISDC over the next several months, many months. So that's kind of the nice part of it. And you can pick and choose and see different segments of it over again. So there's some really wonderful things about it being virtual. Yeah. And then there's other.
We will eventually segment these pieces up, but if you want to see the entirety of day 1, 2, or earlier today, I believe they're up on the space.com YouTube channel already.
Yeah, and the NSS channel as well. They're already there. So, right. They're starting to rack up numbers on their own. So that's fabulous. What do you say? Maybe 2 or 3 more questions?
Yeah, if you got them, sure.
All right. Yeah, we got some good ones here. All right. This is from Stefan Lite. There are a lot of good work being done on terrestrial high-density vertical farming. Has anyone studied how to adapt to space, and how well you can feed folks if you use the best current methods? Vertical farming. Isaac, I think you've done some work on that, right?
We did an episode on space farming specifically. We've done vertical farming in our episodes on ecologies, but For space farming, we just try to look at what would you be doing in terms of, do you have your light source on hand from the sun? Are you getting that in your 24-hour light source? Do you need to do something different with the moon? Do you need to provide gravity? How much gravity by rotation, for instance, does a planet actually need? And it works out to be really dense. If you got the right conditions, you don't need that much power to grow things on. You got that photosynthetically calibrated light, mostly red, a little bit of blue, and some other things. Otherwise, you just pack it in there, and you can. I think we worked out like 2 kilowatts per person. Might be as little as you need to actually grow food, but that was a very theoretical maximum kind of number. So there's definitely some options there for really dense growth in space.
And there's some products that are being grown right now that are highly valuable on the market and have really taken farming in new directions. That'd be the cannabis industry. So
Why did I know you'd say that, Dave?
And there's controversy number 2. So, Hank, have you done any of the
Space, no cannabis.
have you done any of this kind of stuff at High Seas?
Well, we did a little bit of. First of all, I think the amount of volume that you actually need to make a dent in the diet is multiple times the size of the space we have assigned to humans.
Yeah.
So we have 1,200 square feet, a 1,200 square foot dome. I think that we need like multiple domes that size to actually feed people.
Right.
Having said that, we did grow lettuce in this little vertical. It looks like a little tree, and that little bit of fresh veggie that was harvested, I think once a week, was huge. Hugely, how can I say? It was a huge success because everything else that they eat, it was there from the beginning of the mission, so it's freeze dried. Add water and make whatever, and so that gets old real fast. Having a little bit of fresh veggies is a big deal. So yeah, we're looking at doing more of that and expanding that, and maybe having another dome that does just for food kind of thing.
So there's several companies that are actually looking at this that have at least are studying this on Earth. One that we talked about at the Space Portal many years ago was Freight Farms. They're out of Massachusetts, and they do vertical farming in old shipping containers. And they were highly intrigued about this, about the possibility of putting one of these things on the moon. And then Orbital Farms here in California is actually looking at this, and as their name implies, they're looking at actually, doing stuff in orbit. And there is a little mini facility up on the ISS right now where they're growing vegetables there to Hank's question, that really, even a little bit of variety in the diet can be very important psychologically as well as nutritionally.
Yep.
So Dave, how many more questions do you have? I've got one more.
This one's from Aaron, our video production wizard. So let's give Aaron a shot here. And Aaron, thanks for all your hard work. What realms in regard to technology, development, etc., have a society in space have the biggest gaps in advancing to make that a reality in terms of making food, logistics, and the like?
I think we were just talking about farming. I mean, you look at Biosphere 2, and if you've ever been there, they have a huge footprint, and not everything's devoted to food production, obviously, but because they're experimenting with various ecological zones and biomes and so forth. But they had a real problem sustaining themselves on the amount of acreage they had, and that represents a pretty big footprint for a settlement.
Food production for sure, and also waste management. Waste management is society, that is a huge issue in places where you don't have running water.
So according to Bryce Meyer, that's all connected, right?
Right.
Yeah. One of the guys that works for me in Pisces, the Pacific International Space Center for Exploration Systems, spent 8 months in Biosphere 2, and he said 8 people spend all of their time growing food, and they were always hungry. And that is no way to run a space colony. So
waste management is not really a source
automation.
Of fun, so,
yeah, we need to robotically grow food and just use the time that you spend in the greenhouse for entertainment or psychological, whatever, but it shouldn't be somebody's job. Growing food shouldn't be somebody's job. So we have to figure out that robotically. And I've been to the Netherlands. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and doing a lot of stuff there about growing vertically and robotically and all that kind of good stuff. Labor is expensive.
It's the perfect example, though, of getting those investment kickbacks down to earth. If we can get automation up in space to grow food, think about what that's doing down here. Think about more automation on be able to grow crops other than grain or wheat automatically. Berry crops or things that need something delicate to come. Huge payoffs for us. Huge payoffs. And that's one of those examples of rolling back into space and vice versa. Not just Tang, though I like Tang.
So I have a question here from Deborah Elzy. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Asteroid mining is there gold in them rocks, and then she followed up with actually platinum. And I remember talking to Steve Jurvetson about this, and we kind of agreed that if you bring back an asteroid full of platinum, that's great, but the market kind of goes kabang, and suddenly your platinum isn't worth as much anymore. But what are your takes on asteroid mining, the current state of that idea?
Well, I would say the big thing to remember is an asteroid by itself doesn't necessarily have a ton of valuable minerals easily accessible. If you take apart Mount Everest, you're going to get more gold probably than there is the entirety of Fort Knox several times over again. And you don't really want to be baking it back out. You want to send that all home. The other use of stuff is great for maybe construction purposes, but the metal itself, you probably wouldn't crash the market on and stuff like that anyway, but you'll be getting out bits by bits. You're not just going to come home and say, I got $2 quadrillion worth of gold. That's just not how that works out anymore than you point at something like Montana and say, hey, look, there's $2 quadrillion worth of gold in Montana. There probably is.
So let it be remarked here today that Isaac was the first person to advocate dismantling all of Mount Everest.
I have.
Or hollow it out, leave it there.
But back in 2016, the NSS did a workshop that actually Steve Jurvetson hosted for us. And one of the topics that we worked on at that workshop was this idea of a space commodities futures exchange. And Bruce Cahan led that up, and several of us participated in that. That has proceeded on, and they're actually in the process of trying to do that right now. But the economics of this are brutal. It's one thing to have an asteroid that has a lot of valuable materials in it, but they're diffuse. It's not like there's huge gold nuggets, or platinum or anything else there. You have to process, if you'll pardon the pun, an astronomical amount of material to get at that stuff, and then to get it from where you have it to where there's a market for it. What's it going to cost you to get it from here to there? And this is where the transportation costs come in. So it sounds really cool, and I would really like for that to be true, but I have yet to see that really pencil out. But I'm ready to be pleasantly surprised when somebody does.
Yeah, I actually think that there's a period of a history 3.5 billion years ago when the Earth and the Moon were bombarded by asteroids. And on Earth, we lost them all because of subduction tectonics. But on the Moon, they're all still there. So if I was going to go asteroid mining, I would go to the Moon and mine them on the Moon. Yes, it's probably diffuse, but we can have infrastructure on the Moon that processes a huge amount of lunar material and extracts those materials. And so if we can find it on an asteroid, we'll be able to find it on the Moon, and the Moon will have infrastructure within.
And in some of these things, gravity does help.
Right. I mean, just imagine going far away and trying to mine from some rock that has no gravity. That you have. It's just way more complicated than mining the Moon.
I want to second something that Bruce said there, because space resources, of course, is a whole topic. You could spend a whole conference just on that. But I think we've had the tendency lately to cheapen the meaning of the word resource. Just because you have an element or compound that you can use, that you normally use on Earth as a resource, just the fact that you have it up there doesn't mean that it is a resource. In fact, the truth is, none of these things that are out there are resources for us. until the cost of extracting them up there and somehow putting them to use is going to be cheaper than the cost of hauling them all the way from the Earth. And you take water, for example, even water, which is something that is drawing us to the lunar poles, and we're so caught up in this whole water fever. We should realize that once we have Starship, a single landing of Starship can probably land 100 metric tons of clean, purified water on the moon, if that's what we want. And now you have 100 metric tons of water sitting, on a water tower, with the tap at the bottom. I'm exaggerating, but the point is, at what point in our future are we going to have 100 metric tons of clean water extracted from the polar region sitting where we want it to be on the moon for us to do stuff? It's, my guess is decades and decades from now, not a few years. And that's not to say that we should not be pushing the boundaries of of prospecting and resource assessment. So we are doing the right thing, for example, with Viper, that's doing prospecting. But it was still a long ways away from knowing that we somehow have an economy there that is to be seized. And not to mention that 100 metric tons of water that's sitting on Starship can be recycled. So it's not like you just use that once and then you throw away the water. You want to make a long use of it. So, and then 2 Starships is 200 metric tons of water, and 3 is 300. And you know what? Each Starship launch will be expensive, but how much will it cost in infrastructure setup, in operations, until we have 300 metric tons of water sitting on the moon waiting for us?
I mean, I kind of agree with the concept there, but at the same time, that's also 100 tons of water extraction equipment you could bring on that same flight, and 100 tons of solar panels and ionizers and all that stuff is potentially a lot of water.
All I'm saying here is that, to me, it's not as immediate as what one might think. And for one thing, wanting to set up the Artemis base, for example, at the South Pole is actually setting ourselves up for a lot of challenges that may or may not be the right thing for us to do right this minute, at this stage of lunar exploration, until we know really where the water is and how we can extract it and what infrastructure will really take for us to do that properly. Anyway, just some food for thought. There's a bandwagon here, and I like to keep my head out to make sure that I can jump off of it.
Dr. Lee, Renaissance man and contrarian.
We're going really fast down that road there.
Yeah, I actually don't think that we're going to the South North Pole for the water. I think there are other volatiles that we are going to have difficult time finding on Earth that are existing there because of billions of years of I don't know, comets passing by. But water itself is, yes, that's one thing. But there's other things that were minerals that are grown on the moon that were grown in a vacuum. How many minerals do we have on this planet that were grown in a vacuum? So I'm hoping that we're going to find unobtainium, some stuff that doesn't exist on Earth that we find over there that turns out to be more valuable than platinum, which we could mine on Earth. It's
right. So the turns out is really the key word here, because I agree with you. I'm not suggesting 1 second we stop exploring. I mean, we have to understand better what's out there, and I'm prepared to be astounded by what we find. It's just that, that's different from saying that there's an economy out there waiting for us, and that's all I'm saying. It's one step at a time, and let's be really pragmatic about this.
I totally agree, but I think that some kind of mining is going to be the economic driver for what happens on the moon. When we discover something that we haven't got on Earth at all, oh my gosh, then there's going to be a gold rush.
And that we need, yes.
And that we need, of course, yeah.
But the other part of this puzzle that I think kind of goes back to go big or stay home is having enough people in space where you actually have a market for these materials in space, and not just looking at always bringing things back to Earth for use here, but harvesting resources in space for using in where you are makes a lot more sense than making doing stuff on the moon and then sending it back to the Earth, and hopefully that you're going to make some money on it. But you need to have enough people, and you have to have an economy to do that. So the question is what is that critical mass, and how quickly are we going to be able to get there? And obviously, what language are the people that do that going to speak is part of this equation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at Antarctica, for example. The Antarctic stations still use only solar power as a local resource, and the ice. We at McMurdo we pump seawater actually, and desalinate it to provide water supplies to the entire base. But everything else is brought in. We're not growing our food in Antarctica other than for experiments and studies. From an operational standpoint, we're not harvesting in Antarctica. We're not really using local resources. Part of it is because there's a moratorium to not touch the resources, of course. But even if we were extracting resources in Antarctica, it would not be for use there. It would be just for export to the rest of the planet. And again, it's not 1 second I'm suggesting that we shouldn't explore the moon and really assess its resources. I'm just saying, we have to realize that we could be facing a lot of challenges because before any of this is established as economically viable.
Well, we've run well over time, and I personally would like to stay here for another hour, but I know you all have other things to do. So thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, everybody who's watching, for hanging with us for the last 3 days. And I'll just say it one more time. If you're not a member of the NSS, join. And if you are, don't forget to donate. And the website is space.nss.org. Dave, any final words from you?
Well, we don't know what we don't know, and I think when we get to the moon, we're going to learn some pretty phenomenal things that we're all trying to figure out, but really we're not going to know it till we actually start doing things there. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then we can revisit this discussion, and God knows where we're going to go with that. Thank you all very much. This has been fantastic.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.